When the elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor of Adeyemi Holdings, most people had already rehearsed their faces. Smiles were adjusted, spines straightened, voices softened. Fear, in that building, wasn't loud. It was efficient. Adeyemi Holdings didn't look like a place where cruelty thrived. Its glass walls reflected the Lago's sunlight with a deceptive warmth, and the marble floors gleamed like promises kept. Awards lined the corridors: fastest growing conglomerate, best employer of the year, corporate integrity excellence. Words that meant nothing to those who worked inside long enough. Because everyone knew the truth. The company didn't fear failure. It feared one man, Bayo Afolabi. He walked through the revolving doors at exactly 8:07 a.m. as he did every morning. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, his tailored suit hugging a body disciplined by control rather than exercise. He never rushed. The world, in his mind, adjusted to him. The receptionist stood immediately. "Good morning, sir." He didn't answer. That was normal. Bayo Afolabi didn't believe greetings were mutual obligations. They were acknowledgments of hierarchy. If he responded to everyone, he would cheapen his presence. That was his logic, one he had repeated so often it no longer sounded cruel to him. It sounded correct. As he walked past, conversations in the lobby dissolved into whispers. A junior analyst quickly lowered her phone. Two managers stopped laughing mid-sentence. Somewhere near the elevators, a man cleared his throat nervously. Bayo Afolabi noticed all of it. He enjoyed it. Fear was proof of relevance. Silence was confirmation of power. By 36, he had become the youngest senior operations director in the company's history. His performance numbers were extraordinary. Profits surged under his supervision. Deadlines were met. Targets were crushed. Clients praised his efficiency, unaware of the human cost that made those reports possible. Bayo Afolabi didn't motivate people. He pressed them. He humiliated underperformers during meetings, his words sharp and public. He sent emails copied to entire departments, dissecting mistakes like autopsies performed without anesthesia. He believed kindness weakened authority and empathy blurred results. Once, during a quarterly review, a trembling intern tried to explain a data discrepancy. Bayo Afolabi leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold. "Do you know why some people remain poor forever?" he asked the room. Silence. "Because they mistake excuses for explanations." The intern cried in the bathroom for an hour. Bayo Afolabi received praise for maintaining standards. That was how the company worked. The board knew. Human resources knew. Even the CEO knew. But Bayo Afolabi delivered numbers, and numbers were the only language that mattered, until they weren't. Inside his corner office, its glass walls overlooking the restless city, Bayo Afolabi loosened his cufflinks and sat. His desk was immaculate. No family photos. No clutter. Just a framed quote behind him. Results silence critics. He had chosen it himself. To Bayo Afolabi, respect wasn't earned through patience or character. It was extracted through pressure. People respected storms, not breezes. And if a few people broke along the way, that wasn't cruelty, that was selection. He checked his calendar. Strategy meeting. Board review. Lunch with a potential investor. Another day where he would dominate rooms and leave people smaller than he found them. What Bayo Afolabi didn't see, what he could not see, was how the building breathed differently when he entered. How shoulders tensed. How eyes avoided his. How his name, spoken in corridors, carried the same tone people used for disasters they survived. Don't let Bayo Afolabi see that. Bayo Afolabi won't like this. Bayo Afolabi is in a bad mood today. Fear had become institutional. And yet, Bayo Afolabi believed he was admired. That belief was reinforced constantly. Promotions were whispered about. Executives defended him. When complaints surfaced, they disappeared into administrative silence. When staff resigned suddenly, their exit interviews were buried. Performance metrics were his shield. Favoritism, his armor. He mistook protection for approval. As the morning progressed, emails flooded his inbox. Requests, confirmations, apologies. He scanned them quickly, deleting anything that didn't acknowledge his authority properly. One message caught his eye. A minor operational delay at the front desk. A visitor causing confusion. Bayo Afolabi frowned. He disliked disorder. Especially small, inconvenient disorder that reminded him other people existed. He forwarded the email with a single line. "Handle it. I don't tolerate incompetence." Then he leaned back, unaware that somewhere downstairs, in the very space where power first announced itself, the reception area, someone quiet had arrived. Someone patient. Someone unseen. Someone whose presence would dismantle everything he believed about power. Upstairs, Bayo Afalabi smiled at his reflection in the glass. He thought the company feared him because he was strong. He did not yet understand the difference between being feared and being watched. And the building, with all its polished lies, waited. The reception area of Adeyemi Holdings was designed to impress before it informed. Polished marble floors reflected the ceiling lights like still water. A massive abstract sculpture, imported, expensive, meaningless, sat in the center of the lobby, meant to suggest innovation. Behind the reception desk, a glowing wall bore the company's name in brushed steel letters, each one tall and proud. This was not a place built for waiting. And yet, the woman waited. She sat quietly on one of the leather chairs near the far wall, hands folded in her lap, her back straight despite the weight of years pressing down on her bones. A plain headscarf covered hair streaked with gray. Her sandals were worn, carefully mended at the straps. She had arrived just after 8. By 10, no one had spoken to her. At first, the receptionist, young, efficient, already tired, had smiled politely when the woman approached the desk. "Good morning, Ma," she said, her eyes flicking briefly to the visitor's clothes. "Who are you here to see?" The woman had smiled back, a gentle curve of her lips shaped more by habit than by joy. "My son," she said. The receptionist blinked. "Your son?" "Yes," the woman replied calmly. "He works here." The receptionist's fingers hovered over her keyboard. "Name?" The woman hesitated, just for a moment. Not because she didn't know it, but because saying it out loud carried a weight she did not wish to use. "Adeyemi," she said finally. "I was told to come today." The smile on the receptionist's lips froze. Adeyemi. There were many Adeyemis in Lagos, but inside this building, the name had a particular gravity. The receptionist straightened in her chair. "Which department?" she asked, her tone shifting. "I'm not sure," the woman admitted. "He asked me to wait." The receptionist nodded, already losing patience. "Ma, everyone works somewhere. Do you have an appointment? A phone number?" The woman shook her head gently. "No," the receptionist exhaled, her professionalism thinning. "Okay, Ma, please sit there. I'll check." She did not check. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Staff streamed in and out of the building, heels clicking on the marble, ID cards swinging from lanyards. Some glanced at the woman and looked away. Others frowned briefly, a flicker of discomfort passing like a shadow before they hurried on with their important days. An elderly woman did not belong here. She didn't look lost, exactly, just misplaced, like a memory that had wandered into the present uninvited. By mid-morning, the receptionist was thoroughly annoyed. The woman had not complained. She had not asked any more questions. She had not moved. And that, somehow, made her presence heavier, more unsettling. A junior staff member leaned over the reception desk and whispered, "Why is she still here?" The receptionist shrugged, her gaze fixed on her computer screen. "Says she's here to see her son. No appointment." The staff member glanced at the woman. "Security?" he suggested. "Not yet," the receptionist said, though the thought had certainly crossed her mind. Around 11, the woman stood up and slowly approached the desk again. "Excuse me, my daughter," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper above the lobby's hum. "Please, may I use the restroom?" The receptionist pointed down the hall without looking up. Down the hall. The woman thanked her and walked slowly away. Two young executives, standing nearby, exchanged looks. "Why do these people always come here?" One of them muttered, his voice laced with disdain. "Embarrassing," the other replied, shaking his head. "This is not a market." When the woman returned, she resumed her seat, hands folded neatly in her lap again, eyes lowered. She did not hear the comments. Or perhaps she did, and chose not to receive them. She simply waited. Time passed. At noon, the receptionist, finally fed up, sent a message upstairs. There's an elderly woman here asking for Adeyemi. No appointment. The reply came back just minutes later, forwarded with a clear tone of irritation. Handle it. I don't tolerate incompetence. The receptionist stiffened. The message was a direct rebuke. She stood, walked toward the woman, and cleared her throat, her posture rigid. "Ma," she said, her voice now firmer, edged with an authority borrowed from above. "You've been here for hours. If you don't have an appointment, you can't stay. The woman looked up, her eyes calm, observant, unbothered. I understand, she said. He asked me to wait. Who asked you? The receptionist snapped, her patience completely gone. My son. The receptionist's lips thinned into a hard line. Ma, people are busy here. You can't just come and sit around. I can wait, the woman replied gently, the words simple and unwavering. Something about that quiet answer, that unshakable calm, irritated the receptionist deeply. This is a corporate office, she said, her voice rising, drawing the attention of others in the lobby. Heads turned. Not a place for loitering. The woman nodded slowly. I see. She made no move to stand. That was when the receptionist's patience snapped. She gestured sharply toward the elevators. I'll call security if you don't leave. The woman's gaze flicked briefly toward the elevators, then back to the young woman before her. I won't be long, she said. Please. The word, please, hung between them. It sounded out of place in a building that ran on commands. The receptionist opened her mouth to respond. She never got the chance. A familiar pair of polished shoes stopped beside the desk. The air shifted. Conversation stalled. The lobby seemed to shrink inward, as though bracing itself. Bayo Afolabi had arrived. He had come down unexpectedly, irritated by the delay message, already prepared to humiliate whoever was responsible. His gaze swept the lobby, sharp and assessing, then landed on the woman seated near the wall. The receptionist straightened immediately. Sir, Bayo Afolabi raised a hand, silencing her. His eyes moved over the woman in a single, dismissive scan. The faded wrapper, the worn sandals, the calm, waiting posture. Something inside him tightened, not recognition, but contempt. This, he said flatly, is the problem? The receptionist nodded. Yes, sir. She refuses to leave. The woman stood slowly when she heard his voice. She turned toward him, and for the briefest moment, just a flicker, something passed across Bayo Afolabi's face. Not memory. Discomfort. The woman looked at him, her expression open, unreadable. Bayo, she said softly. No one in that lobby had ever said his name like that. Not without fear. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bruise. Bayo Afolabi's jaw tightened. How dare you, he said, his voice cold, carrying across the lobby. Walk into this place and cause trouble. The woman did not answer immediately. She only looked at him, with a sadness so deep it did not beg, did not accuse, did not explain. It simply existed. And in that moment, before anger found its shape, something inside Bayo Afolabi recoiled. Then his pride surged forward to bury it. The building held its breath. The slap had not yet happened, but its shadow had already fallen. For a moment, no one moved. The lobby, usually alive with footsteps, murmured greetings, the soft whir of elevators, had frozen into a single, unbearable stillness. The woman stood facing Bayo Afolabi, her hands clasped before her, her eyes steady. Around them, staff hovered on the edge of action and fear, uncertain whether to intervene or disappear. Bayo Afolabi hated this pause. Silence, when he did not command it, felt like defiance. Answer me, he said, his voice rising just enough to carry authority without shouting. Who are you, and why are you disturbing my office? A few heads turned sharply at the word my. No one corrected him. No one ever did. The woman inhaled slowly, as if choosing each breath with care. I came because you asked me to, she said. Bayo Afolabi's face hardened. I don't know you, he snapped. And even if I did, this is not how you enter a corporate environment. You sit there for hours like a beggar and expect. What? Sympathy. The word beggar landed like a slap of its own. The woman did not flinch. I am not begging, she replied quietly. I am waiting. That answer, calm, unyielding, cut deeper than any insult. Bayo Afolabi stepped closer, his presence towering over her. He lowered his voice, but the anger in it sharpened. You are embarrassing yourself, he said. And you are embarrassing me. She searched his face then, really looked at him. Not as a stranger, not as an executive, but as something familiar that had gone wrong. Bayo, she said again, gently. Listen to me. That was the breaking point. In Bayo Afolabi's world, no one spoke to him like that. Not subordinates. Not strangers. Not women who smelled faintly of soap and long journeys. Don't use my name, he barked. You have no right. Her hand lifted slightly, not in defense, but in instinct, perhaps to touch his arm, perhaps to calm him. That single movement, small and harmless, ignited something ugly in him. Before anyone could react, before thought could catch up with impulse, Bayo Afolabi raised his hand. The sound was sharp, clean, unmistakable. It wasn't just a slap. It was an event. The woman's head snapped to the side, her hair flying across her face. The quiet gasps from onlookers were drowned out by the ringing in her own ears. Silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't a pause. It was a vacuum, heavy with shock and condemnation. A flicker of something. Was it regret? Surprise? Crossed his face before his mask of cold authority slammed back into place. But the damage was done. He had lost control in the one place where control was everything. He had acted not like a CEO, but like a thug. The woman slowly turned her head back to face him. A bright red mark was already blooming on her cheek. But it was her eyes that held the real story. They weren't filled with tears or fear. They held a profound, bottomless disappointment. It was the look of someone who had held onto a thread of hope, only to watch it burn away in an instant. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence screamed louder than any accusation. "Get her out of here," Bayo rasped, his voice rough. He gestured to the security guards, who finally jolted into action. But they moved hesitantly, their usual brisk efficiency gone. They looked from Bayo to the woman, their faces a mixture of duty and reluctance. They were paid to protect the building, to protect him. But this felt wrong. As one of the guards gently took her arm, she didn't resist. She walked with a strange, quiet dignity, her head held high. Every eye in the lobby followed her. They watched the woman in the simple dress, with the mark of violence on her face, being led away like a criminal. But no one in that room believed she was the one who had done something wrong. They had all just witnessed the true nature of the man they worked for, the man they feared. As she reached the revolving doors, she paused and looked back one last time. Her gaze met Bayo's across the vast, marble expanse. In that final, fleeting glance, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't anger. It was a promise. An unspoken vow that this was not the end. The slap was just the beginning. Bayo turned away, trying to regain his composure, trying to pretend the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. "Back to work," he announced to the room at large, his voice brittle. The murmurs started then, low and dangerous, spreading through the lobby like a virus. The video was already being sent, shared, uploaded. The slap that echoed in the silent lobby was about to echo across the entire world. The woman stepped out into the bustling city street, the noise of traffic a stark contrast to the charged silence she'd left behind. The cool air felt good on her stinging cheek. She took a deep breath, the smell of exhaust fumes and street food filling her lungs. She didn't look back. There was no need. A few blocks away, she sat down on a park bench, pulling her simple shawl tighter around her shoulders. She watched the city life swirl around her. Couples walking hand in hand, children chasing pigeons, business people rushing past, lost in their own worlds. For a long time, she just sat there, letting the shock recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The fight wasn't over. It had just been officially declared. Bayo Afolabi thought he had silenced a nuisance. He had no idea he had just awakened an adversary. The city lights began to twinkle on as dusk settled, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel lost in the shadows. She felt a flicker of light within herself. It was the spark of righteous anger, and it was about to become a raging fire. The call wasn't one he ever wanted to receive. It came through a private extension, the kind that only rang when a crisis was already unfolding. The CEO, Adeyemi, was deep in a strategy review, charts and projections spread across the table. His assistant, Miss Bisola, entered the room, a silent specter of bad news. She clutched her tablet so tightly her knuckles were white. Bisola never interrupted. Her presence meant the situation had escalated beyond urgent and into dangerous territory. She leaned in, her voice a low whisper meant only for him. "Sir, there's been an incident in the lobby." Adeyemi's brow furrowed. He was a man who dealt in specifics, in data. What kind of incident? She hesitated, a clear sign she was reluctant to deliver the blow. "That matters," he prompted, his tone firm. She swallowed hard. An elderly woman was assaulted by a senior staff member. A chill seemed to seep into the air-conditioned boardroom. The words hung there, sharp and ugly. "Who?" he asked, the single word carrying immense weight. Bisola glanced at her tablet, a formality. She already knew the answer. Operations. His pen, which had been dancing across a notepad, froze mid-stroke. He pressed on, needing to know the full extent of the damage. And the woman? The pause that followed was longer, heavier. She identified herself as Adeyemi. To the board members watching, the CEO's expression was unreadable. They saw the familiar look of a leader calculating risk, weighing consequences, formulating a response. They'd seen it 1,000 times. But this was different. This wasn't business. Inside, a storm was gathering, a tempest of emotions he hadn't felt in years. He stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the polished floor, a jarring sound in the quiet room. Meeting adjourned, he declared, his voice cutting through the silence. Now, sir, one of the board members started to ask, confused by the sudden dismissal. Now, Adeyemi repeated, his back already to them as he strode towards the door. It clicked shut behind him, sealing the board members in their own bewildered silence. The hallway stretched out before him, feeling impossibly long and unnervingly quiet. Bisola hurried to match his long strides, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the marble. Was it confirmed? He asked, his voice deceptively calm, a low rumble that promised a reckoning. Yes, sir, she replied, all business. Security footage exists. Witnesses too. He gave a single, sharp nod. Where is she? She left the building shortly after the incident. Did anyone stop her? He asked, a grim hope rising in his chest. No, sir. Good. The word was a silent, bitter thought. At least they hadn't subjected her to the further indignity of an interrogation. At least she had been allowed to leave. They reached the heavy oak doors of his office. He dismissed his assistant with a look and closed the door himself. He stood there for a long moment, his hands braced against the solid wood, his head bowed as if in prayer or defeat. The calm facade was beginning to crack, revealing the raw emotion beneath. How bad? He finally asked, his voice rough. Bisola, who had waited just outside, understood he was speaking to her through the door. She didn't soften the truth. A slap. Public. Recorded. Adeyemi closed his eyes, but the image seared itself onto the back of his eyelids. A slap. Public. His mother. In his building. The controlled fury he had maintained for years began to unravel. The cool, calculating CEO was gone. In his place was just the son. The silence in the office was absolute, but in his mind, it was filled with the deafening sound of a single, brutal slap. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on him. His company, his sanctuary, the empire he had built from nothing, had just become the stage for his family's deepest humiliation. And one of his own men was the perpetrator. He straightened up, his eyes opening. They were no longer the eyes of a strategist, but of a man on a warpath. Someone was going to pay for this. He just had to find his mother first. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact he hadn't called in far too long. He took a deep breath, the air burning his lungs, and pressed the button. The line began to ring, each tone an eternity, each one a hammer blow against his heart. In Adeyemi's mind, he saw her face, not as it must have looked moments ago, marked and burning, but as it always had in memory. Calm. My mother, he said quietly, the words almost a whisper in the silent, expansive office. His assistant stood frozen, understanding dawning on her face. The grief and the initial shock didn't leave his face, but something else settled over it, something heavier and colder. It was the familiar weight of control. Get me the footage, he commanded, his voice sharp and clear. All angles. All audio. Yes, sir, she replied, her own voice barely audible. And call legal, he continued. Not HR, legal. She nodded, already turning to leave, her movements swift and efficient. Also, he added, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. Do not inform him of anything yet. She paused at the doorframe, confused. Sir, I don't want apologies, Adeyemi explained, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the glass. I don't want damage control. I want to observe. His assistant hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. What about the board? She asked, knowing the protocol. They'll know when I want them to, he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. No leaks. She took a breath, standing at the threshold of the door. He looked out through the floor-to-ceiling glass wall of his office, down at the sprawling city that buzzed indifferently below, a world unaware of the storm brewing within these walls. I will let him continue. he said, the words hanging in the air. Just as he is. That answer sent a chill down her spine. It was far more unsettling than any threat of immediate termination. She left, closing the door softly behind her, leaving him alone with his cold resolve. Adeyemi sat at his massive desk and played the footage. Alone. The high-definition screen illuminated his face as he watched Bayo Afolabi stride into the lobby with a peacock's pride, draped in borrowed authority. He watched the dismissal in his posture, the impatience in his every gesture, the raw contempt in his eyes as he faced the cleaning lady. Then, the slap. The sharp, ugly sound echoed in the silent office. Adeyemi did not flinch. He didn't even blink. He just replayed it. Again and again. With each viewing, his focus sharpened. He wasn't watching the act of violence itself, but what came after. He studied the look on his mother's face. It wasn't shock. It wasn't fear. It was something far more profound. Recognition. It was the look of someone seeing a truth they had long suspected finally reveal itself in the open. She was right, Adeyemi murmured to the empty room. About everything. About the kind of man Bayo was, the kind of rot that could fester in the corners of power. He picked up his personal phone and dialed her number. The line rang once, twice. Then her voice came through, as steady and unshakable as a mountain. "Hello, my son." "Mama," he said, and for the first time that day, the carefully constructed walls around him cracked. The word broke slightly on his tongue, heavy with a lifetime of respect and love. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight. "I am fine," she replied, her tone calm and reassuring. It was not a hard slap. He could hear the ghost of a smile in her voice, and it made his jaw tighten with a fury he had to suppress. "That is not the point, Mama," he said through gritted teeth. "Sit down," she said softly, "and breathe." He obeyed without thinking, slumping into his leather chair and taking a deep, ragged breath. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, a titan of industry, but in that moment, he was just her son. "I didn't tell them who I was," she continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I don't want you to interfere." He frowned, the CEO resurfacing. "Mama, he assaulted you. In my building." "Listen," she said, her voice carrying an authority that no boardroom could ever grant. "If you punish him immediately, he will learn fear. He will learn to be more careful, to hide his true nature better. He will not learn the truth." The CEO closed his eyes, the logic of her words cutting through his anger. She knew human nature better than any psychologist or business guru he had ever met. "I raised you better than that," she added, and the simple statement was both a comfort and a command. He exhaled slowly, the fire in his chest cooling to embers of calculated patience. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, surrendering to her wisdom. "Nothing," she said. "Yet." A long silence stretched between them, continents apart, yet connected by a bond stronger than any fiber-optic cable. "Let him show you who he really is," she continued, her voice a quiet, powerful current. "Power always reveals itself when it thinks no one is watching. Pride always leads to a fall, but only if you give it enough rope to climb high first." He understood then. This was not a request. It was an instruction, a lesson. This was his mother's way. "I trust you," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, the two words filled with a lifetime of unwavering faith. The call ended. Adeyemi set the phone down and stared at the paused image on his screen. Bayo Afolabi's hand midair, frozen in the single act that would unravel his entire world. Outside his office, the company continued its relentless rhythm. Emails were sent. Meetings were held. Targets were chased. The great machine of commerce churned on, oblivious. And Bayo Afolabi, completely unaware that the very ground beneath his feet had shifted, that he was now the subject of a silent, patient observation, returned to his floor. He walked with his head held high, his arrogance intact, believing he had put a mere cleaning lady in her place. He believed he was in control. For now. But in the quiet office high above the city, the true power was watching and waiting. The game had just begun, and Bayo didn't even know he was a player. He thought he was a king, when in reality, he was just a pawn in a much grander lesson, orchestrated by a mother's wisdom and executed by a son's love. The unraveling would be slow, methodical, and absolute. By Monday morning, the slap had already begun to fade into corporate abstraction. Not because it was forgotten, but because institutions were skilled at sanding down sharp truths until they fit into manageable language. What had been a public assault became an incident. What had been cruelty became a misunderstanding. What had been violence became a personnel concern under review. And Bayo Afolabi felt none of the weight of it. He walked into the office with the same measured confidence, his stride unchanged, his expression cool. If anything, there was a faint edge of satisfaction about him, the kind that came from having asserted dominance and watched the world fall back into line. No reprimand had come, no summons, no warning. To Bayo Afolabi, that silence meant validation. In the corridors, people lowered their voices when he passed. Some looked at him with something close to fear, others with poorly concealed disgust. He noticed only the first. "Good morning, sir," a manager said quickly. Bayo Afolabi nodded once, already moving on. In his office, an email waited. Confidential, board discussion, draft. He opened it casually. Halfway through the message, his lips curved into a smile. The board was considering internal candidates for a newly created executive director role. Expansion, oversight, power consolidated into fewer hands. His name appeared twice. Not officially, of course. Not yet, but enough to confirm what he had always believed. Results protected their own. At lunch, he leaned back in his chair while two subordinates discussed the lobby incident in cautious tones. "They said legal is involved," one murmured. Bayo Afolabi scoffed. "Legal is always involved." "She was old, though," the other said quietly. "People are uncomfortable." He turned to them slowly. "Discomfort is not policy," he said. "Performance is." They fell silent immediately. That afternoon, rumors spread like controlled fire. "Have you heard? He might be promoted. After what he did." "Exactly. That's how this place works." Some employees felt sick. Others felt vindicated in their cynicism. A few, dangerously, felt encouraged. If he could do that and still rise, what couldn't they do? Bayo Afolabi overheard none of the doubt. He walked through the building like a man already rehearsing his next title. He drafted a speech in his head. Efficiency, growth, accountability. He imagined the boardroom, the nodding heads, the way fear would transform into forced respect. That evening, as he shut down his computer, his phone buzzed. A message from a senior executive. Asterisk congratulations in advance. Big things coming. Asterisk. Bayo Afolabi smiled. He thought of the woman only briefly, as an inconvenience, already shrinking in importance. He did not know that the same silence he mistook for approval was being sharpened into a blade. The first crack appeared quietly, almost like a whisper in a crowded room. Bayo Afolabi, a guy who usually had his finger on the pulse of everything happening around him, noticed something odd. An email thread he was typically copied on, one that felt like a default part of his day, ended abruptly without his name popping up. He only caught it because he was eagerly waiting for a response. When it didn't come, he refreshed his inbox not once, but twice, feeling a prickly irritation creeping just beneath his calm facade. It was nothing, he told himself, just an oversight. But then it happened again, and this time, it felt like a punch to the gut. A meeting he normally chaired was rescheduled without a word to him. The calendar invite arrived, already finalized, and his role was downgraded from lead to optional. Can you imagine? He stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, not quite sure whether to laugh at the absurdity or call someone in to fix what he thought was a glaring mistake. In the end, he chose silence. Power, he had always believed, was best asserted selectively. As the days rolled on, the atmosphere around him shifted in ways that were subtle yet infuriating. Conversations would come to a screeching halt when he entered a room, but not in that fearful way he was used to. This felt different. It was deliberate, controlled, like people were choosing to go quiet instead of being forced into it. One day, a junior analyst he barely knew avoided his eye contact and practically slipped past him in the hallway without a word. It was like he was invisible. "Excuse me," Bayo snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. The analyst froze and turned to him, looking almost startled. "Sorry, sir. I was late for a call." Her voice was steady, confident. She didn't sound afraid, and that, more than anything, unsettled him deeply. He started to see patterns everywhere. Emails that used to get instant replies were now answered hours, sometimes even a day, later. Decisions that used to be made on the spot were now deferred. Simple requests? Those were suddenly routed for alignment through other executives. adding layers of bureaucracy that never existed for him before. Doors that once swung open quickly at his approach now required a knock. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, each one a reminder that something fundamental had changed. At lunch one afternoon, he found himself sitting alone. Not because there weren't any empty seats at other tables, but because none were offered. Across the bustling cafeteria, a burst of laughter erupted from a table he used to dominate. When he glanced over, the laughter didn't die down. It just continued, completely indifferent to his presence. Something tight and unfamiliar coiled in his chest. A feeling he couldn't quite name, but it felt heavy, like a stone. That evening, he finally broke his own rule of never showing weakness. He called a senior colleague, someone he considered an ally. "Am I being sidelined?" he asked bluntly, cutting straight to the point. There was a long, telling pause on the other end of the line. "No," the colleague said, but his voice was careful, measured. "Things are just being reviewed." Bayo's grip on his phone tightened. Reviewed by who? Another pause, even longer this time. "Above us. Above us." The phrase echoed in his mind, a cold, ominous drumbeat. He ended the call without another word, feeling a chill creep down his spine. That night, he slept poorly, a rare occurrence for him. For the first time in years, he dreamed of falling, a silent, endless descent through darkness with no ground in sight. He woke up feeling more tired than when he went to bed, dragging himself through the morning routine like a zombie. At the office the next day, his fears took on a more official form. An HR notice went out to the entire company. Routine internal assessment to commence next week. Routine. The word felt like a mockery, a personal jab aimed directly at him. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, steepling his fingers, trying to reason his way out of the growing unease. He had survived so much before: internal complaints, vicious rumors, even outright threats to his position. He had always emerged untouched, stronger even. But this time felt different. This time, there was no one arguing for him, no one rushing to his defense. No one was sending him secret texts to reassure him. The silence, which had once been his greatest ally, his most powerful tool, had turned its face away from him. And for the very first time since he learned how to command respect and dominate rooms, Bayo Afolabi felt something chillingly close to fear. It wasn't the fear of punishment, but of something far worse, the terror of becoming irrelevant. As he sat there, he couldn't help but think about how quickly things could change. One moment, he was at the center of everything, and the next, he was on the outside looking in. It was a stark reminder that in the corporate world, nothing is guaranteed. You can be the star today and a ghost tomorrow. What was it that had shifted? Was it him? Was it them? Or was it just the natural ebb and flow of office politics? He felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He wanted to scream, to shake someone and demand answers. But instead, he sat in silence, a storm brewing inside him, wondering how he could reclaim his place in a world that seemed to be moving on without him. The investigation didn't kick off with a bang, you know? No sirens blaring, no sudden suspensions, and definitely no urgent memos dripping with authority. It was more like the calm before a storm, creeping in quietly, with pressure changes that only those really paying attention could sense. So, picture this. Mid-morning, an email pops up in everyone's inbox. Asterisk, as part of our commitment to organizational excellence and ethical standards, Adeyemi Holdings will be conducting a routine internal review of recent events and workplace conduct. Asterisk routine. Again, Bayo Afolabi read that message twice, and you could almost feel his jaw tighten. His name wasn't mentioned, and honestly, no one's was. That felt way too intentional, right? It was like a subtle nudge, an invitation to come forward rather than an outright accusation. Later that day, two members of the legal team glided onto his floor. Not HR. Nope, this was legal. They moved with this calm politeness that felt almost eerie, casually requesting interviews. Their presence was unobtrusive but impossible to ignore. When they reached his office, they didn't even knock. They sent a message that read, asterisk, please confirm availability. Asterisk Bayo stared at that screen, and anger flared up inside him like a wildfire. Asterisk now. Asterisk he typed back, feeling a surge of defiance. They entered with neutral expressions, tablets in hand, like they were ready to take notes on a lecture rather than a tense interview. Thanks for making time, one of them said, but the warmth was definitely missing. He gestured to the chairs, and Bayo could feel the chill in the air. Let's be efficient. They started asking questions that sounded harmless enough. What happened in the lobby? How did you perceive the interaction? Did you feel threatened? Bayo answered smoothly, confidently, like he was reciting lines he'd rehearsed. He described a disruptive visitor who refused to comply and how he felt a necessary response was required. The lawyers listened without reacting, their faces like stone. Were there witnesses? One asked, and Bayo couldn't help but feel a twinge of irritation. Unfortunately, he replied, a hint of sarcasm slipping through. Were you aware she was elderly? She was standing, he shot back. Age is not a medical condition. The questioner jotted something down on the tablet, and Bayo felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Do you often resolve conflicts physically? The other lawyer asked, and he couldn't help but smile thinly. Only when respect collapses, he said, feeling a surge of pride mixed with unease. The interview wrapped up without any comments. No reassurances, no warnings, just a heavy silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. Later that afternoon, CCTV footage was quietly requested. Security complied, and it felt like the walls were closing in. No one joked about it. No one speculated out loud. By evening, Bayo realized something much worse than just an accusation was unfolding. He was being documented. Every version of the story was being recorded, not to negotiate truth, but to establish it. It felt like he was being trapped in a narrative he didn't want to be part of. As he rode the elevator down, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. For the first time, he didn't like what he saw. The confidence that usually radiated from him looked brittle, and the control he thought he had felt rehearsed, almost fake. At home that night, he poured himself a drink he didn't even enjoy, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. He replayed the moment in his head, not the slap itself, but the look on her face afterward. Not fear, recognition. That realization disturbed him more than any legal consequence ever could. What does that mean for him moving forward? The truth didn't just drop in like a bomb. It seeped in slowly, like water through cracks in a wall. It all started with hushed conversations in offices where people had been too scared to speak up before. You know how it is. When something big happens, everyone feels the weight of it, but no one wants to be the first to say anything. Those who had seen the incident were called in, not by HR, but by legal and compliance, which felt a bit more serious, right? They asked questions that were careful and precise, questions you couldn't twist or dodge. What did you see? What did you hear? Where were you standing? No one was coached, no one was rushed. It was like the room was a pressure cooker, and silence was allowed to stretch out until people finally filled it with honesty. And bit by bit, the story started to come together. The footage was reviewed in rooms where everyone sat in tense silence, eyes glued to the screen. Executives watched the slap frame by frame, the sound cranked up so loud that some flinched at the impact. A few couldn't bear to watch, not because they were unaware of what Bayo Afalabi was capable of, but because this time, there was no corporate jargon strong enough to soften the blow. Still, his name was kept under wraps. Not yet. Then came a closed-door briefing, where legal laid out a single fact without any fluff. The woman involved, the lead counsel said, is the CEO's mother. The room went dead silent. You could almost hear a pin drop. Shock rippled through the executives, not in an explosive way, but a quiet, total kind of shock. A few hands flew to cover mouths, and someone muttered a curse under their breath. She refused to identify herself. The counsel continued, his voice steady. She declined medical attention. She declined to file a formal complaint. A board member leaned forward, brows furrowed. Then why are we here? The counsel's expression remained unchanged, but his words hit hard. Because character, when exposed publicly, becomes a corporate liability. Across the building, the truth spread like wildfire, but without names attached. She was someone important. Not just important, family. The CEO's mother. Suddenly, horror replaced gossip. Staff who had laughed nervously or stayed silent replayed their own inaction, feeling fresh waves of shame wash over them. The receptionist found herself crying in the bathroom, and a security guard requested a reassignment, his face pale. Guilt became contagious, spreading through the halls like a dark cloud. And Bayo Afalabi? He was completely in the dark. He sensed the shift, people avoiding his gaze, conversations halting when he entered a room, but he had no clue why. He figured it was strategy, politics, maybe even envy. At lunch, he caught two managers whispering. The moment they spotted him, they fell silent, their faces drained of color. "What?" he demanded, irritation creeping into his voice. One of them shook his head quickly, stammering, "Nothing, sir." But their eyes told a different story. Fear, sure, but also pity. That night, the CEO found himself sitting across from his mother at her dining table, the air thick with unspoken words. "They know," he said quietly, breaking the silence. She nodded, stirring her tea, her expression calm. "Good. They want to announce it." Her gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "Not yet." He frowned, confusion clouding his features. "Why protect him?" "I am not protecting him," she replied, her tone serene. "I am protecting the lesson." She folded her hands, the gesture almost maternal. Let him walk into the truth, thinking it's still a rumor. In that moment, the CEO understood. The truth wasn't being revealed to save the company. No, it was being sharpened to confront a man who had never truly faced himself. And that's where the real lesson lay, right? In the quiet moments when we have to look in the mirror and confront the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. And the summons arrived without any fanfare, just a simple calendar invite that screamed mandatory. No subject line, no explanation, just a demand to be there. Bayo Afolabi read it twice, irritation bubbling into suspicion. Boardroom meetings were pretty standard, but this one was different. It bypassed his immediate superiors and came straight from the executive office. That was a new twist, and it didn't sit well with him. Straightening his tie, he left his office, mentally rehearsing the calm, collected expression that had seen him through countless confrontations. Whatever this was, he was determined to take control. He always did. As he approached the boardroom, he noticed the heavy doors were already closed, the air thick with unspoken tension. Inside, the board sat along one side of the table, all black men in suits, looking serious and ready for whatever was about to unfold. Legal was on the other side, probably just as curious and anxious. At the head of the table sat Mr. Adeyemi, the CEO, a composed, unreadable man in his 50s. Bayo took the empty chair across from him, trying to gauge the mood in the room. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, keeping his tone steady. The CEO didn't respond right away. Instead, he gestured for the footage to be played. A screen flickered to life, and the lobby appeared. Bayo watched himself enter the frame, confident, dismissive, and a bit irritated. It felt surreal, like he was watching a stranger who just happened to look like him. Then came the slap. The sound echoed in the room, sharp and jarring. No one flinched or looked away. When the footage ended, an oppressive silence settled over the group, thick enough to cut with a knife. Mr. Adeyemi stood, his gaze piercing. "Do you recognize the woman?" he asked, his voice steady but heavy with implication. Bayo hesitated, his mind racing. "She claimed to know me," he replied, trying to maintain his composure. Just then, the door behind him creaked open. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, entered the room. He turned, heart pounding. The woman stepped forward, her cheek healed, her posture unbroken. When their eyes met, something inside Bayo collapsed. "Mama," he whispered, the word slipping out before he could stop it. The room inhaled sharply, the tension palpable. The CEO's voice sliced through the silence. "This is my mother." Bayo stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, blood draining from his face. "I didn't know," he stammered, panic creeping in. "If I had known that," Mr. Adeyemi interrupted, "is the point." The woman remained silent, her gaze steady, and her silence did the real damage. Bayo felt his knees weaken, his carefully constructed power, built on intimidation and impunity, shattering under the weight of recognition. In that moment, he understood. This wasn't just about a slap. It was about who he had become when he thought no one important was watching. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had been so caught up in his own world, so focused on maintaining his image, that he had lost sight of the person he was meant to be. The boardroom, once a place of power and control, felt like a cage now, the walls closing in. How had he let it come to this? How had he forgotten the humanity in others, especially in someone who had once given him everything? The weight of the moment pressed down on him, and for the first time, he felt vulnerable. The story didn't make a grand entrance. It just kind of slipped in under the radar. A leaked memo here, a blurry screenshot there, and a whispered confirmation from someone who should have known better. By the end of the day, social media had taken over, crafting a narrative that corporate silence couldn't touch. Senior executive assaults elderly woman in Lagos office. Victim revealed to be CEO's mother. Video surfaces, and just like that, names started flying around. With names came judgment, and the footage spread like wildfire. People paused it right at the moment of impact, circling Bayo Afolabi's raised hand in red, as if that could somehow capture the horror of what had just happened. Comment sections exploded with outrage and disgust. Personal stories of similar abuse, hidden behind corporate doors, started pouring out. He looks proud. That's not anger. That's entitlement. This is how power rots people. The comments just kept coming, painting a grim picture of a toxic environment. Former employees chimed in too, sharing their own experiences. He humiliated us daily. HR ignored everything. We were afraid. It was like a dam had burst, and the truth flooded out. Even the company's shiny awards came back to haunt them. Screenshots of *Best Employer certificates paired with captions dripping in irony. The contrast was stark and painful. Adeyemi Holdings eventually released a statement, but it felt hollow. It was careful, legal, bloodless. We are aware of the incident and are taking it seriously. But honestly, no one bought it. Bayo Afolabi sat there, watching his phone light up with messages that grew fewer and colder as the hours ticked by. Friends stopped responding, and colleagues quietly blocked him. By nightfall, his name was trending, not as a success story, but as a cautionary tale. Inside the company, no one dared to defend him publicly. Silence had finally found its target, and it was brutal. What do you think? What happens next for Bayo? Termination did not arrive with drama. It came in an envelope. Heavy, cream-colored, delivered by a junior staff member who stood just far enough away to feel safe, yet close enough to fulfill obligation. The young man's hands trembled slightly as he extended it, eyes fixed somewhere over Bayo Afolabi's shoulder. "Sir," he muttered, though the words sounded outdated the moment it left his mouth. Bayo Afolabi took the envelope without thanks. For a heartbeat, he considered not opening it. Power, after all, had taught him that silence could still be leverage, that uncertainty could be a weapon. But this silence felt different, final, uninterested in his reaction. He opened it. The words were clean, clinical, merciless, effective immediately. His breath slowed. Gross misconduct. His jaw tightened. Reputational damage. That one landed hardest, not because it surprised him, but because it stripped away the last illusion. Reputation had been his true currency. He had spent years investing in it, polishing it, weaponizing it. And now, it was being cited as the reason for his erasure. No appeal, no severance, no performance acknowledgement, no gratitude for profits delivered or systems streamlined. Just an ending. He read it twice, then a third time, as though repetition might reveal a loophole hidden between lines. It didn't. When he looked up, the junior staff member was already backing away. "You can take your time," the man said, voice barely audible. "Security will escort you when you're ready." The word burned. Bayo Afolabi nodded once, dismissing him with the same efficiency he had used on others for years. When the door closed, the office no longer felt like his. The glass walls that once signaled authority now exposed him. He could see people moving beyond them, walking, talking, living, careful not to look in. He stood slowly. The office was immaculate, as it always had been. No personal clutter, no sentimentality, just function. He began packing. The awards came down first. Glass and metal symbols of success that now felt fraudulent. He placed them in the box without ceremony. The certificates followed, framed proof that systems had approved of him, even when people hadn't. As he packed, memories intruded uninvited. A junior staff member once kneeling beside this desk, apologizing for a mistake that had not been entirely hers. A meeting where laughter had followed his sharpest insult. The way silence used to fall when he cleared his throat. He had mistaken fear for respect. The realization came quietly, like a crack spreading through glass. He opened his drawer and found the framed quote. Results silence critics. He stared at it longer than he expected. Results had not silenced them. Results had merely delayed their voices. He turned the frame face down and placed it carefully in the box, as though it might still bruise him if mishandled. When he was done, the office looked like it had never belonged to anyone at all. Security arrived. Not aggressively, not apologetically, Two men he had passed 100 times without noticing now stood beside him, waiting. The elevator ride down was silent. In the mirrored walls, Bayo Afolabi watched himself. Not the executive, not the terror of meetings, but a man carrying a box like anyone else who had been told they no longer mattered. The doors opened. The lobby greeted him with indifference. No crowd, no whispers, no satisfaction, just space. He walked out of Adeyemi Holdings without looking back. Outside, Lagos roared on, horns blaring, buses coughing smoke, vendors shouting prices. The city did not pause for fallen men. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, unsure where to go. His phone buzzed. Then again, messages poured in, not support, but consequences. Appointments canceled, consultations withdrawn. A polite note from a recruitment firm expressing regret. Friends he had once dined with did not respond. Numbers went straight to voicemail. A group chat disappeared entirely. By evening, his name had become radioactive. At home, the silence was louder than any boardroom confrontation. The apartment, once a resting place between victories, now felt accusatory. He set the box down and sat on the couch, staring at nothing. He poured himself a drink. Forgot to sip it. Let it sit untouched. Without his title, the days stretched shapeless. He woke early out of habit, then remembered there was nowhere to go. No emails to dominate. No calendars to command. He tried calling an old mentor. It rang, then stopped. He tried again. Blocked. A week passed. Then two. Rejections arrived wrapped in professional language. Given recent developments. At this time, we are unable to proceed. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. His savings dwindled faster than he expected. The lifestyle he had built assumed permanence. Power, he realized too late, was expensive to maintain. Mrs. Adeyemi, the mother of the CEO, didn't celebrate. There were no prayers of thanksgiving for a fallen enemy, no quiet satisfaction whispered into the corners of her home. It was as if the news had landed like a heavy stone, and she felt its weight, but didn't let it disrupt her world. When people brought her the news, termination confirmed, disgrace complete, she listened, nodded once, and returned to whatever her hands were busy with. Cooking, folding. Life didn't pause just because justice had taken shape. Mr. Adeyemi, her rich son in his early 50s, watched her closely during those weeks, expecting her anger to soften into relief, or maybe even a hint of pride. But what he saw instead was something much sterner. Restraint. You could have stopped it earlier, he said one evening, not accusing her, but confessing a truth that had been gnawing at him. One word from you, Mama. Just one. She didn't look up. And then what would he have learned? Mr. Adeyemi felt the weight of her question. That power protects itself, he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. She set the knife down, finally meeting his gaze. No, she said firmly. That power fears exposure. Mrs. Adeyemi had refused to sue, refused compensation, refused public apology tours or press interviews. When advisors suggested restorative programs or symbolic gestures, she turned them all down. I don't want him punished, she said simply, her voice steady. I want him changed. Mr. Adeyemi sighed, feeling the tension in the air. The world is not kind to people who fall. The world was not kind to those he hurt, she replied, her eyes unwavering. He had no answer to that. Weeks later, an envelope arrived at her home, no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink uneven, the paper creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. It was from Bayo Afolabi. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he wrote only of loss, of silence, of the slow understanding that cruelty had been easier than humility. He admitted he didn't know how to be different yet, only that he wanted to try. Mrs. Adeyemi read the letter once. Then again, she folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, her mind swirling with thoughts. Will you reply? Kunal asked, curiosity etched on his face. Not yet, she said, her voice calm but resolute. She chose truth without mercy, because mercy, when given too early, could become another hiding place. And she wouldn't give him that comfort. Not until he had learned to stand without power. It was a tough choice, but she believed it was necessary. She wanted Bayo to understand the weight of his actions, to truly feel the consequences. Maybe then, he could learn empathy and the importance of humility. This wasn't just about justice. It was about transformation. In a world where so many rushed to forgive without understanding, Mrs. Adeyemi stood firm. She knew that true change takes time, and she was willing to wait. How many times had she seen people slip back into old habits the moment they were given a second chance? This time, she would ensure that wasn't the case. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to walk it. She believed in the power of resilience, both for herself and for those who had caused pain. What do you think? Is it right to hold back mercy until someone truly understands their wrongs? Or should we forgive freely? The world was not kind to those he hurt, she replied. Say asterisk asterisk, continue, asterisk asterisk, and ILL send asterisk asterisk chapter 14. A man without a name asterisk asterisk. When Bayo Afolabi's name stopped opening doors, it felt like a part of him had vanished. The identity he once wore like a badge was suddenly gone, and with it, so was the recognition that came with it. At first, the absence was suffocating. He had never realized just how much his identity had been tied to his name. It was like he had a key that unlocked conversations, a golden ticket that made introductions feel significant. Emails had a way of bending the flow of dialogue before they even began, and there was always that slight pause when people heard his title. It was a subtle acknowledgement that made him feel validated, like he mattered in the grand scheme of things. Without those signals, he felt strangely unfinished, like a sentence cut short. Imagine starting a story and having it just stop. That's how it felt. The first time it happened, it really threw him off. He walked into a small logistics firm, and a man behind the desk scanned his resume, nodding politely. Then he asked, "So what exactly are you looking for?" It was a simple question, but for Bayo, it was destabilizing. It was like a rug being pulled out from under him. "I'm flexible," he said after a moment, trying to sound casual. But the word tasted unfamiliar on his tongue, like a stranger's name. He got the job, not because of who he had been, but because they needed someone who could start immediately and work late without complaint. The pay? A fraction of what he once earned. No private office, no assistant, no title that traveled ahead of him. Just a desk and a pile of expectations. His supervisor was younger than him. She spoke plainly, assigned tasks without a hint of apology, and corrected mistakes without fear. The first time she did, something sharp flared inside him. An instinct to dominate, to reassert hierarchy. But he swallowed it down. Not out of virtue, but out of necessity. He learned to listen, and honestly, it was awkward at first. Standing in meetings without speaking felt foreign. Instead of steering conversations, he absorbed them, soaking in the dynamics around him. He noticed how often others paused to invite quieter voices in. It was eye-opening, really. Disagreement didn't always need to be loud. He started to wonder how many times he had mistaken silence for consent in the past. Outside of work, his life began to shrink. Old acquaintances seemed to avoid him, and new ones didn't know him long enough to expect anything from him. At social gatherings, when people asked what he did, he hesitated. "I work in operations," he finally said, and they nodded, satisfied. But there was no recognition that followed. That anonymity bruised him, but it also loosened something he hadn't realized was clenched tight inside him. So, he started taking long walks in the evenings, moving through neighborhoods he had once driven past without a second thought. He watched people navigate life without authority, market women haggling with a fierce kindness, conductors enforcing order without humiliation. Strength, he realized, came in many forms. Some nights, he found himself dreaming of the boardroom, of the power he once held. Other nights, it was the lobby, the slap of rejection appearing less often now. When it did, it felt distant, not excused, not forgiven, but understood as a point of fracture, a reminder of where he had come from. One evening, he found himself standing outside a community center, reading a notice posted on the gate. Asterisk volunteers needed. Asterisk he almost walked past, but something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps a longing for connection. Inside, no one recognized him. No one asked where he came from. They handed him gloves and pointed him toward work. It was refreshing. He cleaned, sorted, and listened. No one flinched when he spoke. That was the hardest part. He had been so used to people expecting him to have all the answers, to lead the way. But here, he was just another person trying to help. Weeks turned into months, and Bayo Afolabi stopped waiting for his past to explain him. He learned to introduce himself without all the fluff. "My name is Bayo," he said, and you know what? It was enough. It was freeing, like shedding a heavy coat in the spring. He realized that sometimes, just being himself was more than enough. Silence didn't just drop in out of nowhere. It settled in like an old friend, cozy and familiar. It filled the spaces where applause used to echo, the absence of notifications lighting up screens with names that once felt significant. Evenings stretched on, heavy with a quiet that held no agenda or audience, just the soft rhythm of life moving forward. For Bayo Afolabi, silence transformed from a weapon he used to wield into a landscape he had to navigate without any armor. It was a bit of a shock, honestly. Imagine going from a life filled with noise and chaos to this stillness that felt both unsettling and liberating. Years rolled by, but not in the way we usually think of time passing. There were no big milestones, no dramatic twists that would make for a great story. Just days, ordinary, unremarkable days that asked nothing of him except to simply be present. He switched jobs more times than he could count, not because he failed, but because he realized he didn't need that sense of permanence to feel valuable anymore. He found himself in warehouses, small firms, and on temporary contracts. Each new place stripped away the habits he once relied on, and in doing so, he started to discover who he really was beneath all that noise. At first, the invisibility felt like punishment. It was disorienting, you know? No one cared how he spoke. No one feared how he looked. No one adjusted themselves around him. It was as if he had become a ghost in his own life. But over time, that feeling morphed into something different, something closer to permission. He began to notice people around him who had never needed to know his name. There was a night guard who brought food from home, a cleaner who sang softly while working, and a supervisor who actually apologized when she was wrong. Those little moments of connection were like tiny treasures in his otherwise quiet existence. Apologies, in particular, caught him off guard every time. They felt so genuine, so human. One evening, while volunteering at the community center, a boy dropped a stack of donated books and froze, waiting for the explosion he had learned to expect from adults. Instead of reacting with anger, Bayo bent down and said, "It's all right. We'll pick them up." The boy stared at him, suspicious at first, but then he slowly started helping. That moment lingered with Bayo far longer than any promotion or achievement ever had. It was a simple act, but it meant the world to both of them. Some nights, he still thought of the woman, Mrs. Adeyemi. He recalled the look on her face, not pain, not rage, but something that felt more like mourning. It wasn't for herself, it was for him. That realization hit him hard. He never forgot that moment. He decided to write to her once more, not to ask for forgiveness, not to seek closure, just to say this. Asterisk, I am quieter now, and I am learning why. Asterisk, he didn't expect a reply, and none came. But that was okay. He understood. Across the city, Mrs. Adeyemi was growing older. Her steps slowed down, and sometimes her hands trembled when she poured tea. But her eyes? They remained sharp and clear, unburdened by regret. She followed the news less and less, but people still brought her updates about Bayo. "He's working now," someone said once. "He's changed," another whispered. "He's struggling," a third added, almost accusingly. She nodded at each report without comment. Change, she knew, didn't need witnesses. It was happening quietly, behind the scenes, in the depths of their lives. One afternoon, sunlight spilled softly across her living room as her son sat beside her. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. She smiled faintly. "Only when silence reminds me." He frowned, trying to understand. "And what does it say?" "That power reveals," she replied thoughtfully. "But silence teaches." She had made her choice long ago, not to destroy, not to absolve, but to let consequence do its patient work. That work was never loud or flashy. For Bayo Afolabi, the reckoning came not in public memory, but in private recognition. There was no redemption arc for him that the world could applaud. No grand return to prominence. No articles celebrating his humility. Just accountability lived quietly, day by day. He stopped introducing himself by what he used to be. He stopped rehearsing explanations. When people asked about his past, he simply said, "I hurt someone." And then he added, "And I had to learn how to live after that." Some people nodded in understanding. Some moved away, perhaps uncomfortable with the honesty. But some stayed, and that was enough for him. Years later, one evening, he found himself walking past the Adeyemi Holdings building again. This time, he didn't stop. He didn't look up. The building, once a symbol of his past, had become just another structure among many. holding the ambitions of people who would one day learn what ambition truly costs. He walked on, feeling lighter somehow. At home, he kept a small notebook, not for plans, not for goals, but for reminders, simple, powerful reminders. Asterisk listen longer than you speak. Asterisk authority is borrowed, never owned. Asterisk fear obeys. Respect stays. Asterisk he never wrote her name in that notebook. He didn't need to. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Mrs. Adeyemi sat by her window, watching the street breathe. Children ran past, laughter spilling into the air, filling the space with joy. Somewhere, a radio played softly in the background, blending with the sounds of life outside. Her life hadn't been transformed by vengeance. It had been affirmed by restraint. She closed her eyes, feeling content. The world might not remember the slap forever, but Bayo Afolabi would. And that was the justice she had chosen. Because some stories don't end with forgiveness. They end with understanding. And when silence finally speaks, it doesn't shout. It stays, lingering in the air like a gentle whisper, reminding us of the lessons learned and the growth that comes from quiet reflection. Every story carries a question. Tonight's is simple. If no one was watching, who would you be? Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us your thoughts in the comments. This is Tales of the Hinterland, where the quiet stories speak the loudest.